So hi again, and welcome again to this month's Dr. Jaspersoft session. We're glad to have you here, guys. Thank you so much for joining. So I'm Badr Draifi, a customer success architect here at TIPCO, and me along with Jonathan Kano, also a customer success architect. We're going to present you an interesting topic today about performance and load testing in Jasper Report Server. So thank you all for being here, and I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Oh, here we go. Okay, so Jasper Report Server performance and load test with Jonathan Kano, and just to talk about the next Dr. Jaspersoft session. So on August 19th, we're going to present Docker and Kubernetes deployment on premise in Jasper Reports Jasper Report server. So stay tuned, and there's going to be an interesting part to answer all of your questions about Docker and Kubernetes. And we're also going to talk about our new way of implementing Docker and Kubernetes starting of Jasper Report Server 7.9, which is way easier than what we are supporting right now. So that will be on August 19th. So you can we will be updating our landing page in the next couple of days. So with the same link, you can go and start registering for this session. So before giving control to Jonathan Cano, I just want to remind you guys to ask all your questions in the Q&A section on the Zoom. So you have a Q&A section at the bottom there. It's better from the chat because I monitored the Q&A section. So if you send anything in the chat, I might not get noticed. So yeah, without further ado, Jonathan Kano, you can start. You can go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. So today we're going to do a little bit of a example of how you can do load testing. So this is a good way to figure out, have you properly sized your Jaspersoft instance? And if you do see issues while you're doing load testing, what are your options on how to scale the system, and how to adjust your settings potentially to make it fit your needs. And also you can plan for growth this way. We are going to use JMeter to create the test plan, and then we're going to monitor with Visual VM, and then we'll talk about some performance options. You don't have to use JMeter. You can use a lot of different tools for this. Basically, anything that can submit and handle a HTTP request. So, a prime example is a lot of people will use, maybe even just something like a curl scripts. I have some scripts that do load testing and verification also by cramming a bunch of jobs into the scheduler, which is nice for when you want to do concurrency testing on scale. And then there's other things, you can just use any kind of tool that handles request posting via REST to do this. But for today, we're going to use JMeter because it's a nice visual tool, which is good for presentation today, and it's a really effective tool for what we're trying to do. I'm going to show you all how to create a basic project and then go through that. So you can go to the next slide. So one thing, I'll go past this one, I'm sorry. Go past this. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a thread group, which essentially defines the thread counts and then how many concurrent users and so on, how many loops we're going to do, any delays and starts and so on. Then we're also going to create some defaults using HTTP request defaults. And this is just to make it easier. So we'll default the username and password in this. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and set the base URL for the request. And then we'll do some samplers. The samplers, you can have as many as you want. What I recommend is picking a sampling of your different reports. So, maybe some high, mediums, low reports in terms of output. Go ahead and create the samplers for those different reports. And then what we'll do is we'll monitor everything with Visual VM. You don't have to use Visual VM. I'm going to use it today. It's a free tool. So is JMeter. For this purposes, there's a lot of other tools out there. You might also want to use a JMX monitoring tool. We're going to just monitor a local box, so it's going to be in process. So if you want to monitor remotely, you can do that with a JMX tool. The only thing you can't do really with a remote JMX tool is actually dump the heap directly. However, you can always log into your box and dump the heap from there. Okay. The only time you really want to dump the heap, though, is if you're trying to get really deep to understand where you're having potential issues in terms of how your performance is working. But typically you'll be able to tell right away because you're going to run a sampling reports and you'll see which reports are taking longer or causing memory issues. Okay. So once we go ahead and go to the next slide, once you have your performance output and you understand what your performance looks like and where you potentially have issues, you might want to think about if you do have issues in your performance monitoring and your performance measuring, how do you handle that? Some basic concepts here, vertical scaling, you can always increase, for instance, the heap size to your JVM. If it's a VM, you can add additional CPU allocation. That could also be if you're using like an AWS EC2 instance, you can increase your output, the number of instances you have, or the size of the instance. For a vertical scale, it would be the size of the instance. Or you can horizontally scale by deploying through a cluster rather than just having a single node. Now, the thing on clusters, if you're locked in terms of your contract to CPUs, you can still scale horizontally. However, you either have to reduce the number of CPUs per item in the cluster, or you can have multiple instances of Tomcat running on a single VM, sharing those CPUs and clustering locally. Now, from an HA perspective, that might not be the best because if the system goes down, you lose your entire cluster. But from a load characteristics and the fact that if one of those instances goes down, you still have another instance up on that VM, that could work also. Another way of doing it is federation. And we're going to get into the demo here in a second. But if federation is essentially splitting up how you handle the load on your server. A lot of our users end up having scheduling becomes a big piece of their load. So it ends up actually happening in order to handle performance is you'll separate your scheduling engine from your actual interactive engine, the engine, the front end that most users see. And you'll do that basically so that your schedules, especially when they're under higher use, maybe you have a bunch of schedules that run first thing in the morning or a bunch of schedules that run at midnight or something like that. You might want to separate that scheduling engine so that those schedules don't impact the interactive users, or you might have a separate instance of Tomcat or something that only spins up at night because most of your schedules are overnight, and that way you can handle more schedule throughput at night. Okay, but for today, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to go ahead and create a basic test script using JMeter. We're going to monitor it with Visual VM so you can understand the characteristics of how your server works and how it's handling that load. And then it gives you an idea of where you might want to do it in terms of scaling depending on your output. Okay, so let's go ahead and get to the demo.
All right.
And if you go ahead and let me share my screen,
yes,
I'll go ahead and start this up.
John, yeah, I'm going to stop sharing now. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. All right. Oh, that didn't mean to have that open. Let me close that. All right, so what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and restart my Tomcat. And I'm going to tell the access host log just so you can see the calls that are coming in from JMeter. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So just going to shut it down. I'm going to respin it up. This is a 7.9 instance. There's nothing particularly special about this. It's using 2 gigs of memory max. I think it starts up with 1 gig. 2 gigs is good for a development server. I wouldn't recommend it for anything in production. It's pretty much the minimum that we run on. That being said, when you watch the characteristics of how this run, you're going to notice it handles the load pretty well. Okay, let's do one more thing. Tomcat logs. I want to tell this local access log here. All right, so we're going to tell the log and just to see what happens, and so we can see the calls are going through. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and spin up an instance of JMeter, and we're going to create a project. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do on this test plan is we're going to add a thread group. Okay, this is essentially just saying, you know, how many users are going to, we're going to pretend like we're playing, like we are, so that we can get concurrency. How long we want the ramp up time to be. I'm just going to leave it at 1, and then how many times we want to loop. So how many times we want to run these reports over and over and over. If your loop count's too small, you really don't get to see the load on the server and how it handles everything. So, you know, at least make the loop count somewhere around 100 or something, depending on how many reports you're going to run. So for the thread group, we'll just call this Jaspersoft Dr. J demo. All right. We're going to have it do 20 users, 20 concurrent users. And I'm going to put a thread count of 100. Okay. That gives me a good set of tests, you know, so it's going to act like it's 20 concurrent users. We're going to run some reports up to 100 times in the loop count and see what happens. And actually, I'm going to keep this small for first. I'll just put at 5 for the initial loop count, and then I'll jump it up to 100 later and show you what happens. So the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and add a configuration element. We're going to add a request defaults setup. Okay. And this is just so we can have some defaults for the request to the Jaspersoft server. We're going to do HTTP. I'm not using HTTPS. You probably go, if you want to test it, you know, for instance, you want to test how it goes through your load balancer, you would obviously, you know, point to your load balancer IP here or something like that. If you just want to test your local host, which is what I'm going to do, it's just HTTP is localhost. 8080. Actually, I'm sorry, I didn't go there. That's going to go over here in the port number. The only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and default the username and password for the login. If you're using something like a pre-auth token, you would probably go and put your pre-auth token in here. But I'm just going to use username. I'm going to use super user. And I'm going to go and use password. And it's also super user. This is just the default. If anyone's ever worked with Jaspersoft, you know that super user is the default for logging as the super user, the administrator of the system. I'm not going to fill in the path or anything else. I'm just going to leave it at the default request defaults here. So what happens is this will set the default so that every call after this, when I create some samplers, we'll use this username, password, and start off with this localhost and this port. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is go ahead and add some samplers. I'm going to add a sampler. I'll do one first, and then we'll go ahead and add some more here in a second. We'll do an HTTP request. It's going to get this information from the default. So the only thing I really need to do is put in the path here. Okay. So if I was to go to my server, and I'm going to go ahead and log in. I'm going to go to my repository. Go to my reports, because this is really what you want to test is kind of the reports and see how your server is running. We'll just grab this guy here. We'll go to properties for him. And grab that link right there. That's the report I want to run. And this one can run without any parameters, so it's really nice. It makes it an easy test. If you want to pass some parameters, you absolutely can. I'm just not going to bother on this one. So the thing I want to do is I want to call that report. So I'm going to use our REST API that uses the asynchronous reports API. And the way you get to that is Jasper Server Pro. Now, again, if you're going through like a proxy or load balancer, you may be, mapping to Jasper Server Pro. It may not be in your path, but if you just hit localhost, it's probably localhost 8080 Jasper Server Pro. Then you're going to hit the REST services, which is under REST v2, and then we're going to hit the reports for the async. This is the synchronous, sorry, not asynchronous. This is the synchronous reports API. And the reason I'm using this is it just makes it easier because I can do a single URL to execute reports. Again, it's going to pick up the base localhost and port and username and password information from the defaults above. So we don't need to put that entire piece. And then the report I want to run is going to be this report. And I'm going to have that report come out as a PDF output, so .pdf. And that way, it just gives me a good quick test to actually execute a report. So if I go ahead and
So sorry to interrupt you, Jonathan.
sure.
You have in your Jasper server path, it looks like you need SER on the first part.
Thank you. There you go.
Uh,
Jasper Server Pro. Appreciate that. So this will give you a path. This will do is it'll actually execute the report. This would be the same as if I was to take this information and I was to go to my server and I wanted to do the same thing. You'll see it, put it right here. If I was to do this and I hit execute, it will run the report and export it to PDF. And that you can see it's running the report right now. This is a graphic heavy report, which is good if you're testing CPU. You can see there's the output of that report. So that's what we're going to emulate in the JMeter when we're actually running the reports in JMeter, okay? So if I go back here, that's what's going to end up happening. So you can see on the request right here, I'm going to be following the request by telling that log. And you'll see this was that get request to export the PDF. You can see that's what I just did a second ago. And you see that it came in on a request response. It's got a 200, which means it was valid. So it logged us in and gave us the 200. The difference you're going to notice when I call it through here is because I'm doing everything in a single call. I'm not managing a session. You can manage a session if you want to, but I'm just not going to bother here. Is that when I run this through this mechanism, it's going to run it about 20 times. I don't care. Let me just go and run this thing. Did it run?
it looks like it's running there.
Looks like it's running. Let's see what's happening over here. Oh, yeah, there it goes. So it's running the report, and you'll see I'm getting the 200s, but you'll see it's actually adding the username and password to the request, and then it's setting this from the defaults. It knows to use localhost, but it's adding the username and password, and you can see I got a 200, so it ran valid. And this was actually running that one report. Now, obviously, that would not do a whole lot in terms of, testing an average load or a set of reports. So what you want to do next is you're going to go ahead and create a bunch of these. So let's go ahead and create a bunch of these, and let's add. Let's go over here, add another sampler for HTTP. Let's go get a different report. Let's say sales mix by city. I'll just grab a couple of these. Let's grab that report. That here. And grab a path from here. So let's do that. And then that'll be dot, maybe I'll do a CSV for this guy. Yeah, actually I'll use, let's use doc or docx or something like that. Yeah, that's fine. And then let's do another one. Let's add another sampler HTTP request. And let's get one more report. Let's do something simple, like count list. Because you want a sampling of your reports. The more complex ones like this one with heavy graphics, maybe to the simple ones like an account list, okay? Let's go and copy that. And let's add that guy in here. And grab that path before it. Okay, and count list, we'll just do XLS. So an Excel spreadsheet output. So we got 3 different types of outputs, 3 different reports. We're hitting this server at that port with these credentials, and we're going to hit it 20 times. 20 concurrent threads, and this is how many times we're going to hit it. We'll hit it, let's say 20 times. So we're going to do a total of 20 times 20, which is 400 runs. So let's go ahead and look at this will be the log file where everything's going to happen. And we also want to go ahead and see how this looks with Visual VM, so we can understand what's actually happening on the server. So I'm going to go ahead and spin up the Visual VM. If you haven't used Visual VM, it's also a free product that you can use. And I'm going to attach to this local tomcat right here. And I'm going to monitor. I'm not so worried actually here about classes and threads. You can monitor that if you want. What I really want to watch is this memory. So you can see right now, I allocated a minimum heap size of 1 gig. My max heap size is 2 gigs. I'm currently running around, what is this, 400 megs. That's just your base allocation that you need for the server. My CPU is pretty much completely flat. So nothing's really happening on my server right now. This memory, a lot of this memory is just taken up with things that have to load up, because when we start to spin up the server, Tomcat has some base classes it loads. Jaspersoft has a lot of base classes. So this is just kind of your minimum. That's why we say when you create a dev server, 2 gigs is pretty much the minimum, because as soon as I start running reports, you're going to see this memory allocation go up pretty fast. I take it back. I got 4 gigs as my max memory for Tomcat, not 2. I thought I had set it 2, but it's set at 4. But you're still going to see it spin up pretty quick. There are some rules of thumb when it comes to sizing for Jaspersoft. The rule of thumb is that 4 gigs is good for 20 to 25 concurrent users that are actively concurrent, meaning they're running reports all at the same time. That being said, what you're going to notice, I'm going to run this where 20 users running 3 reports in concurrency for up to several times. I bet you this memory never even exceeds 2 gigs. So even though that's a rule of thumb, it's a very, very loose rule of thumb. Depending on the size of your reports, the output, how much memory they take, if you're using ad hoc, in which case you're storing information in the cache memory, there's a lot of things that go into this. So what you want to do is kind of get a sampling of what your users use. And if you want, you can turn on the audit features if you have an enterprise, or you can watch your log files if you don't have the enterprise audit. Get an idea of what the sampling is of what your users actually use on your server. And then you can run those requests by creating HTTP requests for those different types of reports and add them to your HTTP request sampler. And then that way, when you run this test, it'll run a variety of different reports or ad hocs to get you an idea of what your actual usage is going to look like. So you can see what it's going to look like in Visual VM. So now I'm going to go ahead and kick off this process in JMeter. Okay. And then we're going to come back here and watch what happens. So if I go to JMeter and I kick off this process, we're going to run a total of 400 reports. 400 executions. That's 20 users times 20 threads times 3 reports. So this is going to be a total of 120 reports running virtually concurrent with 20 of them concurrent, 20 threads of 20 users concurrently running those 120 reports. Or wait, no, 20 times 20 is 400 times 3. So 1,200 report runs. This will be 1,200 report runs. Okay. So go ahead and let's go and run this, and let's see what happens over here on the Visual VM. And I'm going to execute this. No, I don't want to see my test plan. Now watch what happens. You're going to see immediately it's starting to spike up. We're starting to get logins. We're starting to get running of execution of the reports. We're still not even exceeding 800 megs yet. So let's see what happens over time with this. And then let's also watch the CPU. Notice the CPU has jumped up to about 70%. Jaspersoft, I don't ever really see the CPU as an issue. Even regardless of how many threads you're running, normally what ends up happening is this thing will peg out 80, 90%, but it never really goes over that. So CPU, if you have CPU issues, it's because you're doing something very intense. A lot of graphics, for instance, might do CPU. A lot of PDF export, if you're doing heavy graphics with PDF export, could take up more CPU. The reason is in the background, we actually call Chrome, if you're using 7.9, if you're using an earlier version of Jaspersoft, we're using Phantom.js to do the PDF export for graphic heavy reports when you're exporting to PDF and some other formats. If you're not doing graphic heavy reports, and you're just doing data, your CPU is almost never the issue. It's going to be memory, especially if you have larger reports. Now, mind you, when this run finishes, I will have run 1,200 reports. And you can already see so far, I'm only at 1.4 megs. So these are running concurrently right now, 20 threads running 3 reports. So I'm running about 60 reports simultaneously right now, back to back, as fast as I can, for 20 different times. And we're still only at like 1.5 megs of use, or 1.5 gigs of memory usage. You'll see it spinning up and down in terms of the size. When the heap gets cleaned out, the garbage collector comes in here, we're actually going to drop back down to 400. Maybe we'll keep some residual memory, so maybe we drop down to 600 to 800 megs of memory. But you can see what it's just spinning through here. If you actually want to see what's happening on the server, I'm telling that localhost access log, and the reason I'm doing that is so you can see the calls coming in. You'll notice that these are all getting 200s, so we know they're running successfully on these calls, and you can see all the different calls coming in for the different reports. Um, this tail is refreshing every so often, but if you actually went through here, you'd see all the report runs. You can see just tons and tons of reports running over and over and over again. Okay. And that's what this is doing. This is measuring how my server performs with 20 concurrent users. So if you have 400 users, but only concurrent users is what we really care about, because users that are sitting idle don't really bother the server. They don't really make an effect. But the concurrent users are the ones we really care about, because we want to see how they're affecting the server when the server's under load. I can tell that even though this server's only got 4 gigs of heap allocated, I still haven't broken even 2 gigs of my memory use. So I'm way below my max with 20 concurrent users. So if this is the size of my average reports, not my maximum size of reports or the smallest reports, but if these 3 reports I picked are a ranking of small, medium, large reports, and some of them are heavy graphics, like the first one I picked that I'm exporting to PDF, I can tell you that this is what a profile is of 20 concurrent users. If that's a good variety check on my reports, no, most of my reports fall somewhere between those 3 reports, and I'm only using 1.8 gigs of memory, this 4 gigs can handle then up to 40 concurrent users, and actually maybe even a little bit more, because some of the base memory allocation here was just for the server running. Remember, it was at 400 megs before we even started. So maybe 40 to 50 concurrent users for my size of reports. If my reports are much larger, and they take up more memory, and I'm exporting 500 meg, 1 gigabyte files, it may be a lot smaller in terms of number of concurrent users I can handle. But you get an idea of what your server needs to be sized for by looking at this profile. You can see now I've already finished. I've done 1,200 reports in about 4 minutes. I've run 1,200 reports. Okay, and that's with the different exports, being PDF, Excel, and Word doc. So I ran all those reports in that amount of time. You'll see the memory's coming down already. We're down to 900 megs. I don't think the garbage collector is fully kicked in. And if you want to get an idea, if I go out and force garbage collection, and I go out and perform the garbage collection and I force it, you'll see that when the garbage collection does kick in and it cleans up everything, we're going to drop to about 660 megs of memory. The reason it's still higher than it was before we ran any reports or any kind of load is because some classes and other parts of the system that maybe we didn't use before, like the first time we exported, we did a PDF export. Next time we did a Word doc, and then an Excel. There are different Java classes that have to load for each of those exporters. So some of this might just be the Java classes that got loaded into the perm space as we loaded those additional exporters. So this is probably where we're going to stay in terms of memory use. Maybe if we do a few different additional export types, we'll see additional classes get loaded into that perm space and the overall thread, or I'm sorry, overall heap. The low end of the heap will actually increase. Maybe it'll go up to 600, 700, 800 megs, 900 megs. But if you got at least 2 gigs in the server, you're going to be pretty good. You can see our max size we ever reached was 1.887. So we never even got to over half of our capacity, which means that we can definitely handle, if this is our average size of reports, those 3 are representative type of reports that we're going to run, we can definitely handle 40 concurrent users on this 4 gig box. If that's not correct, we add additional reports and it changes the profile of our reports. And we see some larger outputs coming in, many more pages or much more in terms of the graphs, a lot more memory use. We might have to change our memory allocation or so on. So you can also see that on our CPU utilization, we really kind of never went above 70%. Even when the garbage collector kicked in here, we only get down, we get with maybe 20%. So under extreme load, we never really got too bad. And actually, if I bumped up to 40 threads and run a small load, I bet you we maybe get up to 80 or 90%, but you're never going to break the CPU size. So let's go and try that. Let's just do 40. So this is 40 concurrent users. I'm just going to do it for a short run of 5. So that's 200 times 3. This is going to be 600 reports running as fast as we can on 40 threads. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this job. Don't really care about saving it. Let's see what happens on our server. It's going to spin up pretty quick because we're running a lot of threads here. So let's see what happens. Okay, we're spinning up. CPU's going up, memory's going up. If you want to see what's happening on the server, you can see we're getting a bunch of requests in, and they're all going through at 200, so we know everything's going correctly on the server. We are at 1.2 and ramping up, and we're still only at 60%. So this is actually really good. I mean, we're running 40 concurrent users, running 3 different reports for a fairly short run, but we're still going to run 600 reports by the time this thing is done. 40 times, is that right? Yeah, 40 times 3 times 5, because we're doing 40 users or 40 threads times 5 on the loop count, that's 200, and then we got 3 requests, so 3 different reports, the 600 reports we're going to run. Okay, so we're running 600 reports. We broke 2 gigs of heap space now, so we've actually broke that allocation. But remember, this is 40 concurrent users, not 20 the way we were running earlier, but yet the memory size is still only increased by a very small amount from 1.8 total last time to 2 gigs total this time of actual size used. It is going up a little bit, and we'll probably see it go up some more here. But the interesting thing is the CPU really isn't that high. Now, I will say some of this is because the database in the back end is probably doing some caching, and also we're using some ad hoc, so we might be hitting some cache on the back end. However, I am running my database locally, so this is not just the CPU utilization for Tomcat. This is my CPU from my machine, which includes the database engine running behind the scenes. Okay, and it's finished. So we finished running 600 reports. That was at 10:36, and we started at 10:35. So about a minute and a half. In about a minute and a half, we ran 600 reports. Again, these are smaller reports. If you're running larger reports, that may not be, your case, but it just gives you an idea. So I'm going to go ahead and perform the garbage collector and see where we end up now. I bet you we go back down to about 800 megs of memory use, which is what we should be at. Yeah, we're at 793, so we're right back to where we were before. And that makes sense because we didn't load any additional classes. There's some residual cache probably sitting in there in some pieces, but basically we're done. You can see the garbage collector ran right here. So with 40 concurrent users, we still didn't even break 60% CPU. Like I said, CPU is almost never the issue. Memory use, obviously it went up, but these were in and out of memory so fast that even with 40 concurrent processes, it really didn't cause that much of a headache for the server. Okay, so if you're trying to size your server, you have a set of reports that you typically run, and you want an idea of how that actually looks in terms of performance, and do you need to increase your memory allocation, or do you need to change your server to a cluster or something like that? This is a great way to just do a quick test to understand your sizing. I'm going to stop here and just kind of stop with the demo. Stop my share. And if anyone has questions, please go ahead and answer or put your questions into the Q&A. And let's go ahead and just discuss if there's any questions on this.
All right.
Now you can
So
bring up the slideware now better.
Yes, let's go to, there you go.
Yeah, we've got links in here too for JMeter and Visual VM. So if you want to know where to download the tool or how to use the tools, they're in here. It follows with the demo I just did, and I do see a Q&A question in here. Can we test dashboards using the same process? You absolutely can. There is a REST v2 call for dashboards. The funny thing is, I don't actually think it's published, but it does execute. If you can't figure out how to do it with the REST v2 dashboards, and if you ever need that API, let me know, or just post it on the community site, and I think that it's already answered out there. But it's like REST v2/dashboards, but you don't have to use that one. You can also use the HTTP request and just use a normal GET. And you can grab that request from the browser. So you can actually go in the browser to your dashboard, grab the URL that runs the dashboard, and use that in the process instead of the REST API. It won't give you the output, but it'll execute the dashboard. And then there's a separate call you can make to export it. But there is a REST API for this also. So yes, you can use dashboards. Okay. Is there a way to tell the peak concurrent users in our system? It depends. If you are using JMX monitoring, you can monitor it over time, and you can see what the peak is over time. If you have audit turned on, you can kind of look there. Another way of doing it is if you want to know right now, if you know that your busy time of the day is typically 3 p.m., you can randomly every so often run the JS diagnostic report, which is in public reports diagnostic. So go to public diagnostic, and there's a diagnostic report in there. If you run that diagnostic report, it'll tell you how many users are concurrently logged into your system right now. Um, if you want, you can use Visual VM and just let it run during the day, and then just kind of log it and keep an eye on it. But there's a lot of JMX monitoring tools out there that if you're going to do long-term monitoring and you really want to understand what your profile looks over a longer term, I would use a JMX monitoring tool. Can this test be run for data-heavy ad hoc views? Absolutely, it can. If you save your ad hoc view as a report, I would probably run it that way with some defaults for your report parameters and run the report, because then you can use the reports API, which is the one I just used. You can also run the ad hoc view using the HTTP request if you want to run the ad hoc view that way. But when you run a report that is based on an ad hoc view, basically opening up your ad hoc view and doing a save as and saving it as a report, it'll create a report, and that report actually has a snapshot of the ad hoc view at the time you create the report. When you run that report, it runs the ad hoc view in the background and then shows the data in the report look and feel, but it's still using the ad hoc view. So that's an easier way to run your test. So you can use the reports API just like I did today by creating a report or saving ad hoc view as a report, and then use that reports API I just ran and run your ad hoc view reports. And that'll give you the same test for data heavy ad hoc views. Another thing is you don't have to use JMeter. If you want to script all this and you want to script it through like as a part of your CI/CD process or your test process, you can certainly use Bash scripts and just use curl commands. There's a lot of other tools out there that can execute. At the end of the day, all I'm doing is executing an HTTP GET against REST v2 reports with the URI to the report dot, and then whatever export format I want. If I want to pass some parameters, I can do a question mark after the .pdf or whatever it might be for the export, and do the name of the parameter equals, and then the value I want to pass to that parameter. So you can have your entire execution report returning the results of the report execution export in a single line using the reports API. If you have a tool that maintains the cookie and maintains the session, and you can do it with JMeter, you don't have to use new sessions each time like I just did, but you can have it maintain the session and run multiple reports under that session. And in which case you don't really care about the username and password on additional calls. It's just you have to maintain the session if you do that. Okay. Is there a guide on what to do if you test the limits of the allocated memory and it's just simple as bumping up the memory limits? Yes, if you want to vertically um, scale, you'll bump up the memory limits, for instance. If you want to horizontally scale though, and you're hitting memory limits, you might want to do is create a cluster and then scale horizontally. That from an HA perspective, that might be better anyway. The only thing you got to be careful of is make sure you check your contract for how many CPUs you're allowed. So that if you scale horizontally and you're going from you got a 4 CPU contract, if you have 2 servers participating in that cluster, each of them needs to only have 2 CPUs. Again, I don't see CPU normally is not almost never the issue. It has happened, but it's almost never the issue with Jaspersoft. It's almost always memory. So if you're running into memory issues and you want to scale, either scale vertically by adding additional heap allocation, raising your XMX, or scale horizontally by going ahead and creating a cluster. But if you create a cluster, make sure that you check on how to design that cluster effectively because you need to have the cache replication turned on. Otherwise, things will go very bad over time. So make sure you do that. And on it, for instance, if you're doing your cluster in an AWS environment, the default normally for cache replication is RMI. You can't use that. You have to use JMS for your cache replication. So little things you have to worry about depending on how you deploy your applications. If you're using, for instance, AWS or Kubernetes or something like Docker, there might be some slight differences in how you want to design your cluster. Okay. The other thing you can do, and I talked about this briefly, is you can federate. A lot of our customers find that the load on their server overnight is all scheduled jobs. Or maybe they have a lot of schedules that run first thing in the morning. It seems like the system doesn't run well in the morning if users are calling and complaining. If you separate your scheduling engine from your interactive front end user system and you have 2 instances of Jaspersoft, you can turn off the scheduler on one instance, turn it on the scheduling instance. They both use the same repository, but they do not participate in the same load balancer. And what happens is everyone who comes in interactively will use the interactive instance and the scheduling, and they can schedule through that. It'll write a record into the repository, but the scheduling engine will be running against the same repository and will be running those jobs in a separate process. So your users don't get slowed down while you're running a large load of schedules. Okay, that's federation on the instead of vertical or horizontal scaling. Any more questions?
I can also add to that, John. So if you ever if you ever like stuck on term of resource, you hit the limits of your memory resources, and you can't add more resources for that. So you can also still optimize your process of generating the report. You can if you're using Studio Reports, you can use data snapshots. If you are using ad hoc, you can use ad hoc cache, configure the cache. You can also optimize your query to not bring all the data, bring just the data you need, do all the calculation and aggregation on the query, do it in the database server side, not in the Jasper server own memory. So there's a couple of things that you can do, quick tips to optimize your report generation also. And this can use GDBC other than GNDI. So there is, use GNDI connection rather than GDBC. There's also some other tips that you can actually include in your and configure in your Jasper server that will definitely help you to have better performance.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this is
There
also,
are, if you go to the communities page
yeah,
here
I think it's
also,
also there. Exactly.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, if you go to the community page, you just do a search on there for performance. There's a performance tips and tricks. There's a couple pages in there on that, so you can go check those. Go ahead, Better. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, definitely. This is just what I'm going to say. I thought that maybe it's already on your resource slide, but it doesn't look like it's there. But if you go just in the Jaspersoft community and look for optimization, Jasper report optimization reports or something like that, you'll definitely find a lot of articles and wikis about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any more questions, or do you want to talk about what's coming next?
Okay, so it looks like we don't have any questions anymore. Okay, so thank you so much, John, for this great presentation, very rich demo. So guys, please, if you still have any questions or remarks or comments, please feel free to ask us in the email, drjaspersoft@tipco.com. And if you are on an Upshift program, please reach out to your CSM. If you are on no Upshift program, you can still use ask in the community website, or you can use the Dr. Jaspersoft Tipco email. So in the couple of days, we're going to update our landing page so we can register on the Docker and Kubernetes deployment. And we're going to also have the recording of this webinar and the slides published in our Dr. Jaspersoft community page that you see right there in the resources slide. Okay, so don't forget to register for the next session, and thank you all for joining again. That will be it for today's session. Hope it was helpful for you, and see you next time. Thank you.